Welcome to the Homegrown podcast, a place where we share the truth about food and farming from our kitchen to yours. I'm your host, Liz Hazelmeyer, along with my husband, Joey.
Good afternoon.
And together we hope to educate, inspire, and equip you in your pursuit of true nourishment. Today's guest is Annabella Daily, a Finnish journalist, writer, speaker, social media creator, and wife and mother of 3 boys. Annabella shares her unique perspective on American parenting as a Nordic mother living in the U.S. Annabella, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I am so excited because I've been following your social media account for several months now, and you have this really beautiful way of asking questions about things that you see in American parenting and lifestyle and things that you know from your experience. Um, and just the vast difference between Americans' culture of parenthood and maybe the Nordic way, and just painting a lens through cultural differences really, I find, helps break through of any of this kind of argumentative nature because it's just completely 2 different worlds. So I've really loved gleaning wisdom from you, and so I'm excited to dive into those topics today. But first, before we even get there, I'd love to just hear a little bit of your story and how you ended up as a mom in the U.S. Making all these observations.
My story is quite non-traditional. So I grew up in Finland, which is all the way up in Northern Europe, right next to the other Nordic countries, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and then, of course, Iceland is up there as well. And at a very young age, I knew that I was going to live abroad. So when I was about 7 years old, I went to my English teacher and I said, this doesn't cut it. I need more homework. I'm going to be working and living in a country where I'm going to speak English. So I need to master this. And I did end up living in multiple different countries, but for whatever reason, I always ended up back in the US. So to backtrack a little bit, I started working in media at age 16. And then by the time I was 19, I felt I was ready to go and reach my dreams in another country. And after living in actually 6 different countries in 3 different continents, I ended up back in the US actually doing an internship for ABC Good Morning America. And that's how I ended up on the path to doing journalism and working in media in the US.
Wow. Did you meet your husband in the United States then?
I did, and that's actually a cute story. So I had already been in the US for about a decade, and I had definitely had my fair share of bad dates. And I figured it will never happen for me. It was this 1 year where I decided I'm going to be engaged within a year, and I will really focus on meeting an amazing man. And I basically took this strategy where I would smile at every man I met and say hi. And it turned out that my husband ended up being my neighbor. And he was one of those people I smiled at and said hi. And we both lived in Brooklyn, New York. We were both working there at the time. And it was quite cute. So we ended up meeting in the lobby and first becoming friends. And then that's the love story. And then we ended up having our kids in Brooklyn as well, our first 2.
Okay, that's so cute. So you moved to the US at 19 and you're here for a decade, so that puts you at like your late 20s when you finally get married and or you meet your husband, right? At 19 years old, is were you intimidated to move to a new country and start this new career? How did your parents feel about that?
My parents were quite nomadic themselves. So they ended up taking a gap year and moving to a little island in the middle of nowhere in Thailand for a year. And during that time, I was actually studying in London. So before I settled in the US, I actually lived in London and 5 other countries in 3 different continents. And my mom always had this feeling that if you want to do something, just go try it.
Mm.
So I personally have always felt most comfortable when I'm in a brand new environment, ideally in a new country, in a place where I don't know anyone. I don't know where I am, but I might have a map and I don't speak the language, perhaps a few words. And I feel like that's always this incredible feeling of adventure the start of everything new. So I feel like those moments were the ones that really shaped my life, because being able to dive into a new culture with your eyes open, I think gives you so much perspective and teaches you every time something new.
Mm, that's beautiful. I love that. I'm curious then, so you go on to have 3 boys in Brooklyn, and at what point did you start noticing that American parenting was different from your Finnish background?
So this comes after I had two kids back to back. So of course, I moved to the US after my career dreams. I wanted to work at the biggest publishing companies in the world. I wanted to work at the Condé Nast. Think of Devil Wears Prada and Hearst. And I did end up reaching those dreams. At the same time, when I was working there, I realized that those who had children, they had to make the choice to mainly see the children during the weekends, because days are extremely long and you're always on, you're always working. And I figured, well, I came all the way here. I've sacrificed so much over the last decade to get to where I am. I can somehow figure this out. And and then I couldn't. So it was this interesting decision that I had to make, where I just could not move forward in this career that where I really wanted to be, but also completely sacrifice the children that I also wanted. So then I sort of became a freelancer for a while, but that too, as everybody knows, can be exhausting. And being very ambitious and wanting to stay on top of my game, I worked 24/7. So I worked when the kids were napping. I worked at night when they went to sleep. So I completely sacrificed my own well-being. And all the messages around were about these American mothers who both had career dreams and had families. But there was this message of, you can do it all. You can have it all. Keep going, keep hustling, keep pushing. And I did that until I was just a completely hollow version of myself. And I remember there was this moment where I'm literally crying on the floor. My two of my boys are just playing with cars. And I call my mom and I'm like, I don't feel anything. Like, I don't feel love. I feel nothing. I'm just completely empty inside. And she said, breathe. She's like, fantasize. What would you like to do right now? And I said, I want to take an Uber and I want to go to Bali by myself and stay there for 6 months until I somehow recover and feel something again. So I did not end up going to Bali by myself, but I ended up going on this journey of trying to figure out, well, how do I heal myself? How do I come out of this really extreme burnout? And I saw a lot of different experts, from the doctors to holistic doctors to mental health professionals. And at every turn, I felt I was so beyond anything that they were trying to suggest. And eventually, I started looking into my native Finland and what are parents doing out there? Why are they not so exhausted and stressed out and overwhelmed and anxious all the time? And then I had this idea, let's go and see it for ourselves. I grew up there, but I never lived there as a mother. I persuaded my husband and said, let's go for 9 weeks and let's live that life. Let's see what it's all about. Because I wanted to also understand, was it really true? Finland is now, Finland has been named as the happiest country in the world for seventh year in a row. And I wanted to see if it actually was that. And we got there, and within the first week, I could not believe it. I kept asking myself, why did not anyone tell me life could be like this? And it was such a dramatic shift from the messages that we get about parenthood and motherhood in the US. And I really felt like for the first time in a decade, I could see, I could hear, I could take a breath. And it was really life changing for me. So experiencing this, I felt like I cannot not share this story because even though not everybody's going to pack their bags and move overseas, and especially to a Nordic country, there's so much in the mindset and in the habits and just in the way you do day-to-day life, the decisions you make that you can bring over here and adapt to bring more of that balance and bandwidth. And with that, also more joy into our lives, especially as parents.
Mhm. I love that. Did you feel your perception of motherhood growing up, you had an idea of it? Did you ever visualize that? Or were you just walking in fresh and then when you were in the American setting, you kind of absorbed what everyone else had to say about motherhood?
The latter, when I moved here, the only thing I really thought about was the career and the magazines I wanted to work for and what I wanted to write and the stories I wanted to tell as a journalist or just as a media professional. And then when I became a mother, it was a big shift and I was looking to see what people around me were doing. And I think I also, just like I wanted to be my career, you want to adapt, you want to be the good American. You want to try to do what you think other people are able to do as well. But I definitely failed at being an American mother because it did not work. It definitely left me not the best version of myself.
Mm. Yeah. Okay, so let's dive into some specifics. So you go to Finland for 6, no, sorry, 9 weeks. And what's your first sort of observation that you see the big differences?
I must tell you first, the 9 weeks ended up turning into 5 months. We couldn't leave. It was that good.
It's
It
like we're
was
happy.
that good. It, we couldn't leave. We had to take it in for a little bit longer. So I would say the first thing that I noticed was the ease and the relaxed attitude that parents had about their children. And I would say a really good example was I rented an apartment in the very center of Helsinki, and there are numerous playgrounds all around. So within a 5-minute walk, there's so many different playgrounds. And you go there, and the parents are usually chatting. Nobody's hovering over the child. And it was really interesting because the first thing that I noticed was that I was narrating everything my child was doing, the habit I had picked up in the US. Oh, you're picking up the red shovel. Oh, you're putting sand into your bucket.
So good. This is so good.
And I realized that I sounded completely crazy over there because no one did it. I was looking around me and I figured like what I was wondering what they thought about me. Of course, they didn't care. They were focused on chatting, amongst themselves or just enjoying a calm moment, me time, maybe sitting on the side bench while their kids were playing. And I stopped. And it was really interesting talking to the other parents. I asked them why don't you constantly talk and narrate everything your child is doing? And they said, because the child needs to be able to have a moment of peace. They need to be able to play in peace. They also need to have a moment to hear their own thoughts. And it was interesting. The other thing was what was fascinating was that the playgrounds are quite adventurous. And I would say an American would rate them as full of risky play. So in the Nordics, we don't really have a word for risky play. Risky play is just play.
Mm.
So even then, I had to calm my reactions, like when I'm taking a deep breath, when my child is doing something. But then I see other toddlers. Well, now he's 3, but then he was younger. doing these things that I felt potentially were too dangerous, but these other kids were doing them too. And I figured, well, let me give him an opportunity to see what he can do. All these other parents feel comfortable with this. So why don't I feel comfortable with it too? I can see what happens. And it was really incredible. Then coming back, I would take him to a playground, sometimes with an American and friend, and they would say, how can you just sit there on the side of the sandbox or on a chair? I could never do that. And I said, because he's got this. If he needs me, I'm right here, but he's got this. I want him to be able to have the opportunity to calculate these risks for himself, because that's how I'm preparing him for the world. And that's really a philosophy that I picked up immediately when I was back in Finland.
This idea of giving kids some autonomy, right, to kind of make decisions for themselves is so cool. And like hearing you say it, that makes so much sense, right? I'm like, oh yeah, totally. I don't want to sit there and narrate my kid's life. I mean, it's hilarious when you say that. I've totally done that. You see parents here doing that, right? A lot of us are probably guilty of saying, "Oh wow, you picked up the shovel." Like, "Oh, you're swinging." Like, it's like, "Oh my gosh, like can they just go play?" They're probably just like, "My parents are so annoying," right? But one question I would have in the midst of that, and I'm sure a lot of parents are wondering, so we give our kids some autonomy. That also is kind of like giving them the opportunity to make a mistake, right? And so what I would kind of follow that up with is when inevitably, because kids will make mistakes, when inevitably in Finland, when you were there in Helsinki and someone would fall down, how would the parents respond to their kid kind of maybe making a mistake or falling down or getting hurt?
I can give you two examples. One was a situation where I was supervising my child, and one was a situation where I was not. He was biking around Helsinki by himself. At He was at that point 7 years old. So the first incident was interesting. My toddler, my youngest, was playing in a pile of mud in the playground. And when it's almost like a mud puddle. And he was sitting in this mud puddle, of course, wearing rain pants with another toddler who he didn't know. I didn't know the parents. And as happens when you do mud play, mud flies. And accidentally, my son threw a huge shovelful of mud onto this toddler girl's face and body, just all over.
Oh, gosh.
And I froze and I was trying to figure out, what do I need to do? How do I need to react? Because I didn't have a playbook for this. I had not been there long enough as a toddler mom to understand, what does a parent need to do in this situation? So I went through all the different options in my head, and then I decided just not to do anything until I could figure out how the other parents reacted and potentially mimic that reaction. And you know what happened? No one reacted in any way at all.
Wow.
And the girl just kept playing. The mom saw it, but she just kept talking to her friend. My son kept playing, and everything just kept moving forward on the playground as if nothing had happened. So then there was this interesting sense of, stuff happens, but you don't always need to react to it,
Mm.
because what are you reacting to? If it's a little stumble, potentially you're putting your reaction on your child. Let's say they scrape their knee, but they might not be bothered by it. They're playing, they think it's part of it. If you immediately go in and say, oh, did you get hurt? That might not have been what your child was thinking. They might have been like, ooh, like, wow, I did have a great balance, but let me try this again. So I won't fall off this high beam, or, whatever he was, for example, balancing on. So there's this element of, you are there and you respond, but you don't have to respond so fast.
Mm.
You first read your child and see what the situation calls for. And if it doesn't call for anything, you let it go. The other incident was interesting because my So as you do in Finland, kids from 6 and 7 years old onwards, they oftentimes start moving about independently. And I was really excited to get to this stage. So when we spent the almost 5 months there, they had a chance to go to school by themselves. And, it would be 10, 15-minute bike ride or a half-hour walk. When there was a lot of snow, you couldn't take your bike. And they also started going by themselves to their soccer practice and seeing friends independently. And then when we went there, the time after that, they had graduated to being able to bike around to see their friends at specific playgrounds or other areas by the seaside, for example. So I was at this cafe and my son was going to meet me there. And he showed up with a totally bloody knee.
Mm.
What happened? He's like, oh, I totally fell. I, his knee was bleeding, his elbow was scraped. So he had definitely fallen pretty badly. Luckily, I had band-aids, as I always do as a mother of three, my purse. And it was really interesting. I said, well, what did you do? Did somebody come and help you? He said, no. I dusted my knee off. I got back on my bike and I came to see you at this cafe. Where's my cupcake? And I think it was so interesting for me to hear that as well, because what I learned and took away from it is that things happen in life. You sometimes do fall off the bike. Here, my son had the opportunity to learn that he can also take care of himself. There might be situations where nobody's going to just run and help you. But he was confident enough. He said he took the situation for what it was. Nobody's right here. I fell. I got to get back on the bike. I'm going to go there. And then we move forward. So it was really interesting how he dealt with it.
So you're saying that it's normal for kids 6 and 7 years old to walk 30 minutes to school or to bike on their own, no supervision.
Right. So I would say at the youngest, my second child was just turning 7. So 7, 8, 9, 10. Yes. So then they start. I would say for my kids, it just took a lot of training because we hadn't been there. And here it's not possible to practice that. But basically let's say we went to Helsinki together right now, what you would probably see on the streets is kindergartners, or I mean, daycare age kids. So probably, 4-year-olds, they would be walking around, learning the street signs. I saw this really cute group. When I was there last time, the teacher had probably, well, at least 6 4-year-olds. And there was another assistant teacher as well. And they were holding these huge cards, laminated cards with all the different traffic signs. And they were learning how to cross the street, how to know, what's happening with the traffic lights, what all the different traffic signs and signals mean. And they do that every year constantly. And then of course parents do that too. And when I went there, I had to play a lot of catch up on these life skills because they were all over the place.
Mm.
They hadn't figured out yet how you navigate on a bike path. Their bike paths are on the sidewalk, not on the road with the cars. But they had to navigate and figure out not only like, how do the cars stop? Where is the tram coming from? There's electric bikes. There's buses. So there's so much traffic. So you need to know where you need to stay and how you move through all these multiple different street crossings. And I would say that probably between the ages of 7 and 8, that's when the kids are really starting to master these skills. And by the time they are 9, 10, they are really quite independent. So at the age of 9, 10, you will see kids in a grocery store. They might be like having a picnic in the park with their friends. You'll see them in public transport by themselves. They are just moving all over the town or the city, just like you and I would.
What do you think? So, why are kids not doing that in America? Aside from the being taught how to do it or being given the freedom, is there like, do you think it's unsafe or unwise? Like, why are kids not doing that in America?
I think one of the biggest reasons is that there's so much less opportunity because we don't have European like cities here. So the only one option would be, I guess, New York City or Chicago, potentially some smaller cities that might have public transportation and cities that are more built for pedestrians, maybe San Francisco, but those tend to be somewhat more dangerous cities. So I live really close to New York City. When I take my my sons to New York City, I hold on to them so tight. But when we are in Europe, I sort of unleash them.
Mm,
And I think here what one needs to do is think of it a little bit differently. So around me in my neighborhood or in my town or in my city, where can they be independent? And in those situations, I think it's really important to evaluate safety and the opportunity for my child to learn to be independent, because it's not just learning to be independent, it's really learning to take care of yourself out there.
mm,
And ultimately, we all have to. The younger you know what to do in so many different situations, a Nordic person would see that as a good thing. So, the way you bring up a child, your number one responsibility or goal is to help your child survive out in the world. And you teach them, you educate them, you constantly give them more and more and more freedom to allow them to develop the confidence and the expertise and the awareness to do all those things. And I think what happens here oftentimes is that we value safety, whether real or perceived, it's still going to feel the same, so highly that at the same time, our kids don't get the chance to develop these really critical life skills. And it was interesting because when I went to Finland for that first time for that long period of time, I thought my biggest challenge as a parent would be to get them to speak Finnish fluently. And that was really my goal. I didn't realize how behind in life skills they were. So when I went there and I looked at kids that were their age and they were capable of so much more, and I'm not talking about excelling in a math test or something like that. I'm talking about just life skills like being able to go to the grocery store, maybe with 10 euros in your hand. And if I'm asking you to get, almond milk and apples, and I say you can get a little treat with what's left, can you then walk to the store? Can you buy what's needed? Can you calculate in your head what's left? And then you choose with that money what's left and find your way home, for example. Um, it was really interesting when I was there. I kept asking the other Nordic mothers, how do I teach this? How do I teach this type of independence to my children? Because I feel like they sort of missed out on the opportunity. And now I'm sort of coming into this where the other kids already can do these things, but they can't. So like, what do I do? And the grocery store example was one of the things, and one mom suggested. And I have a fun story about this because it was Sunday, and I said, "This is great. There's not a lot of traffic out there. Nobody goes anywhere on Sunday. So go to this grocery store, get these things, and get yourself a little treat." And then when they came back, they said, "Oh, like, Mama, that the grocery store was closed." I said, "Oh, but you got all these things. What did you do?" And they said, "Oh, we remembered the other grocery store. We walked there."
oh well.
And I said, "That's really incredible. You could have gotten a double treat." So it's really interesting. Our kids are capable of so much if we just give them the opportunity. And I think here in the US, we just have to get way more creative because there's so much fewer opportunities to do this and then really foster those things. Like, for example, I'm making this up. I don't know if this would feel safe or not safe to somebody, but let's say you park in the Whole Foods parking lot and then you go and you say, hey, get me these things. I'll wait right here. Maybe you wait at the where the checkout is. But at least then they would have an opportunity to even walk a few aisles away from you. Get the idea that, oh, I confidently found this, picked this up, and then came back. Whatever it is that you can do, maybe right around the neighborhood, there's a street where they can go on bike by themselves, but it might just be a 2-minute loop right next to your house. Whatever it is, I think for us to find these opportunities would really give the kids the kind of confidence and the awareness to then be a little bit more able to safely be out there.
It's true. It's like American parents are so obsessed with safety that we end up putting our kids in more harm because we're not training them in these ways. And then God forbid there is a situation where they have to figure it out on their own. Say they're 9, 10 years old, they have zero training. And then we're really in a tough spot because then we're like, okay, we've done zero awareness, we've done zero education on this, and we were so addicted to the control we felt as their parent that now they have no life skill or ability to be autonomous. And then the other thing that that does too is this constant message of burnout. I mean, it's hard to not talk to any mom who's like, I'm just so burnt out. And even if she has one child, or maybe she has 5 children, it doesn't matter. It's like it doesn't even matter what your life situation is. It's just acceptable that if you're a mom in the United States, you should feel burnout. And I think those two things actually go hand in hand because the less we're able to really like break through that feeling of control and train our kids in their ways, then of course you're going to feel like you have to do every little thing for your kid and you have to be every little spot and you can't let them go 3 aisles over and get the tomato sauce. And it's a kind of this two-part issue of now we've got less equipped kids and more burnt out mothers. And that's a terrible, terrible dichotomy and balance to have in your family. And so I totally resonate with everything you're saying. I'm astonished at the kindergarten class being taught these streets. I think that's brilliant. And I recognize a lot of this is situational, right? And like you said, a lot of this will have to adapt to our own US culture and what's safe within our realm. But I'm even thinking like, gosh, we live in a little subdivision, but if we cross this really busy street, we're open up to a bigger subdivision. So could we train, even like our 13-year-old how to cross the street safely? I mean, it's a very busy street so that she could like go ride her bike further away, far away from us,
Mm.
like give her a little bit more access because gosh darn it, she's proven herself in other ways.
Absolutely.
And could we then take our 8-year-old and push her in different ways and then find safe ways for our 4-year-old to do the same? So this is igniting a lot of that. And I do find as an American mom, this great desire to push against this obsession with control and safety, because I just don't think it's serving our kids. And I think it's interesting you said the Finnish mindset is equip your kids to be successful adults, whereas the American mindset appears to be keep your kids as safe and in your control as long as possible. And I'm just not sure those outcomes are really working for us. So.
I mean, I think the underlying principle here that's really shining through for me, Annabella, that you're telling us is that our kids are just more capable than we're kind of allowing them to be.
Mm.
And in exactly that, right? They might be in um, Finland or in a European city that's more equipped for them to live this autonomous like city dwelling, you know, like child, right? Whereas like city dwelling children in America might be kind of like feral, right? Where you're like, oh no, like so, like that's kind of like the thought that you think of, but it just doesn't sound like that's the case. And the way that we take that principle to the suburbs, like where we are, or in a city in America, might look like exactly what she's saying, is just giving them opportunities where they are available. And it's not always going to look as convenient, right? For us as parents. I just thought of that idea of teaching them street signs. Well, that's that's a lot more work and stress that I have to deal with. Whereas if initially I just say, no, no, hold my hand, we're crossing the road, don't think about it, you don't go near the road. Well, in that moment, that's easier. Well, if you do that, you know, 500 times, well, it becomes a lot less convenient in the long run, right? And if you teach them the kind of ability to cross the road safely, it might take 200 times of you teaching them safely, but on that 201st time, now they're crossing on their own, right? So there's a minor inconvenience there. The same thing for the Whole Foods example, which is brilliant, right? You roll into the parking lot and you watch them walk in the store and you're thinking like, oh no, something bad's gonna happen, but you're like, it's really not like there's not like that much bad that's going to happen if you let your kid go in, hey, our 10-year-old or our 13-year-old go do some grocery shopping. And that's good. I love
I
it.
I remember the time when I first let our daughter go into the public library by herself. I was parked outside in the van and I thought, okay, well, there might be a back entrance, but I know the whole library is staffed. I know where she's going. And so I'm going to just watch the door. I think she was 11 at the time, which in Finnish, spectrum would be like, wow, that's pretty old. But for Americans, like you don't. And so this is the funny part is that the staff noticed that she was alone, and also we were going during the school day because we're a homeschooling family, that they ended up getting to know her. And so now they call her, oh, you're the homeschool girl. Oh, you always come in by yourself, or you bring your little sister with you. Because I started sending our other little daughter in too. And so now it's so rare in the US that for me to send her into our public library alone, unattended, the staff like know who she is, which is just such a great depiction of no one else is doing that. First of all the kids are in school. Second of all, they are definitely not sending them in to both return books, browse books for new ones, check out on their own, and then come and then also get stuff for their siblings. And sometimes it's like a 10-minute trip that she's in there and I'm just sitting outside, in the car waiting for her. And I remember like almost texting my parents like, is this okay? Like, is this normal? And that's where that fear is rooted in me because I'm surrounded by it. But just hearing stories of other cultures is always so encouraging because then I think, no, she was capable of that and she is capable. And that gives me hope and she gets excited by it. Like she loves going to the library because it's like her own little independent thing. I'm not hovering over her shoulder saying, which book are you looking at? And there's even been times where she's come back out to the car and said, hey, I saw this book on display and it had some pretty, inappropriate themes to it. And I thought that was so interesting. And so she's navigating that world now of like public media and things like that. And so all of this is just I'm geeking out over it because it's just giving me like feels like liberty as a parent. I'd love to hear also like more on this burnout thing of mothers and more things you've seen. Are there other practices that American moms are doing that maybe Nordic moms would never do that's leading to this like feeling of drudgery or burden?
I think there's several. It's really interesting because during that 5 month period and every time we have gone back there since, the first thing that happens when I go there is that I have to do so many less things. I'm responsible for so many less things. And I feel like it's almost like if you have a brain and you empty part of the hard drive, and now suddenly you have all this extra space to think straight, innovate, get new ideas. I think we, as mothers in the US, take on so much voluntarily, either because potentially sometimes we really want to, potentially sometimes because it makes us feel like that's what we need to do as good moms, and sometimes even just because of social pressure. So I think there's some things, of course, that just come with the environment, like million different waivers and forms and for every single little thing your kid does there's so much work. But then there's so much that we could literally outsource it to our children and to give them the opportunity. For example, play dates. this was really interesting because last time we were there, so now that I put both of my kids we're going to third and fourth grade, but I kept them both in third grade in Helsinki. I couldn't schedule any of their play dates in Helsinki because parents don't do that anymore at that age. Kids 100% take care of their own social plans and play dates and figure out where they're going to meet and what they're going to do. So my responsibility really was teaching my kids how to do that for themselves. Because again, that had been a skill that we hadn't done. So the way I started there is actually similar to what I've been doing now here in the US, because this takes a lot off your plate if you don't have to plan every single hour for your children. So for example, kids love to play with other kids. You can teach them. I love the watch phones because there's no Wi-Fi, there's no social media, or I mean, there's Wi-Fi, but there's no social media, no apps. So if you have a really basic watch phone, obviously you can let them borrow your phone as well. But I think if they have something of their own, it makes it really easy, something super basic. And then they can call their friend and say, hey, what are you doing? Can you come to my house on Tuesday? And then by doing this, your one teaching them is, okay, what's on your schedule this week? Maybe you have soccer on Wednesday and Friday, but the other days you're free. So why don't you call your friend first, learn to introduce yourself. Hi, this is Miles. And then you say, are you free on these dates? Can you come to my house? Can somebody drop you off? And can somebody pick you up? And I think it was really interesting where over there, they were able to do that with the other kids. And then when we came back, I had to start teaching them how to do that with the other kids' parents because they're the only kids who have their own device. So it was a little bit different approach. So say you call somebody's mom and you say, hi, this is Miles. How are you? You nicely greet them. And then you say, I would love a play date with your son. Is he available on these days? And then could he come to my house or can I come to your house? On these days, my mom or my dad can drive me to you. And I think it's really sweet. All the friends' parents who I have sort of been involuntarily, they've been now involved in my experiment of trying to get my kids to schedule their own play dates in the US, which no one else that I know is doing. They've been so receptive to it. They find it's really cute that my son calls them. I think now he can do it pretty politely instead of just saying, is your son available? And I think it's really nice. And now I think we inspire, there's at least one other child where now their parents were really receptive to it. So now they schedule their own play dates. So there's been situations where I planned something for them and I realized I never needed to. They got the afternoon figured out. They're going to go play backyard soccer and have the time of their lives. And I think by doing these, by letting our children decide what they want to do, letting them be in charge of their own happiness, letting them schedule these things for themselves also takes an enormous amount of time and bandwidth. It takes a lot of time off of our schedules and gives us a lot of bandwidth.
Yeah, I love that. I think even just the thought of letting my daughter use my phone to call my friend's, phone who they have a daughter the same age. I think that would be just the most adorable way to even just practice telephone skills. I mean, is that a dying thing? Are we all just texting nowadays? I don't know, but if you have to call to order a pizza or something, having those little moments where they pick it up. I know for us, we have started leaving our phone. None of our kids have devices yet, but we've started leaving our phone with our 8-year-old, even though the 13-year-old's babysitting, because we say, hey, you're able to text us if you want, because I want her to know how to text me. So we'll have like one of the other parents' phone with us if we go somewhere, if we go out to eat, or if we go to play cards at a friend's house or a neighbor's house. And I specifically leave it with the 8-year-old, not the 13-year-old, because the 13-year-old already knows how to text.
Yeah, she's squared away.
She already can text her friends on my phone, and that's her own big thing. But the 8-year-old, I was like, I want you to, one, practice your literacy skills, reading and writing. Don't just use the voice to text, even though I know sometimes she does. But also having the ability to navigate the phone if you were in an emergency. Okay, where would you call up 911? How would you reach someone? How could you call it? Like, how quickly could you call us if you had a question that you really wanted to get our attention? So I love that you're also letting your your third graders use the phone and contact people. I think to be a parent on the other end of that must be so cute of just, oh, this is, Dorothy calling for a play date. How adorable
And I
that
think
would
there's
be.
even a more primitive option than that, right? I mean, this is what I did when I was a kid is I worked at the, farmer's market that my family started, and I saved up money and I bought a bicycle, right?
Mm.
And that was like my first wheels, you know what I'm saying? Like I had the keys. Now I could travel longer distances to knock on the doors of my friends' houses and see if they were allowed to play. And if they said no, guess what I did? I wasn't like, wow, I'm never doing this again. I thought, all right. And I rode my bike home. And if they said yes, it was game time, right? And here's a funny thing. As a parent, I feel this way at least. When a kid that I know in some capacity and my kids know that kid shows up at our door and wants to take my kid out of our house to go interact with them, I'm always pro. Like I've never had someone knock on my door, like, hey, can Sophie or Ruthie or Ray come out to play? And think to myself, unless they're eating dinner, they need to go to sleep, or there's some like major conflict. I'm always like, yes, yes, they can. And I'm like yelling up the stairs, like, get down here, so and so's here. So it's just interesting that idea for letting our kids kind of go off, whether it be through depending on how the distance, right? Of like whether it's a phone call with using our phone, and teaching them how to interact with adults, which is a whole other conversation I want to get to, but also just like utilize some freedom there and like trust your kid, let them go out and knock on the door. I don't know. It's crazy to me that seems to be going away. Maybe it's not, but I feel like it's less than it was when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. I'm curious what else so mothers can. I agree with you. I think the American way is kind of to take on too much. You actually have this wonderful reel where you talk about how you've seen all of these, like, get ready with me, like, start the day reels from other creators, and they do a million things in the morning. They wake up early, they work out, which I'm very pro. But then the other piece that they do is they make breakfast for their 8, 9, 10-year-old. They pack their kids lunch, and then they do all these other things. And your whole point in the reel is like, hey, wake up, start your day, do what you need to do, but you can actually let your 8-year-old make their own breakfast. And by the way, they can pack their lunch and they can get themselves ready. They can pick out their clothes. They could bring down their dirty laundry and then you could throw it in for them or they could throw it in. And even this culture on social media of to be an amazing mom, I'm going to show you all of the 25 things I do before 9 a.m., perpetuates into this idea that if you want to be a good mom, you better work yourself to the bone and you better work really hard and do everything you can. And what that ends up doing is sometimes I think we end up doing too much for our kids. And now, the way I'll preface is this: I am very pro high performance. I think people should wake up early. I think they should start their day with a workout if that's what they want to do. I think if you want to be a high performer and you want to fill your days, I'm so pro that. But I think sometimes we're filling our days as moms with the wrong things. And instead of like, hey, I read 2 chapters of this incredible book this morning with my coffee that really got my mind thinking in this way. Or instead of saying, I went on this like 3-mile run outside, didn't even listen to music, and I just got my mind right. We are waking up and we're doing all of these tasks, and often then we're robbing our kids of doing anything for themselves. We're literally putting their clean laundry in their drawers for them. I mean, it's wild. And so I think if instead The answer is not, hey, do less, have more self-care, take a bath, sleep in. That's not what I'm a proponent. That's not what I'm saying here. I'm saying, what if we shifted our definition of having a productive day as a parent to things that not only served our families, but also helped us stay on top of things that were going to sharpen us as people. Spend time in your Bible, spend time in the morning in prayer. Do anything you want to fill that time with, but it doesn't have to look like I'm this amazing mom because I do everything for my kids, and then they show up with these big, beautiful brushed hair and bows in their hair and their perfect styled outfits, and they're at school and look at me. That's like our badge of honor. And so what are some of the Nordic ways that we could kind of adopt this mentality of not doing too much for our kids and really building into ourselves as parents of the home?
I think there's two things and they go hand in hand. So it's the balance for you, which Nordics value very highly. And it's the preparing your child for the world to succeed in the world at the same time. So if we start with preparing your child to succeed in the world, one of the basic things, of course, is the morning. Can you get yourself ready for school? Can you do all the things we need to do in the morning, from brushing your teeth to making your bed to getting dressed to figuring out what you're going to have for breakfast and making it, and checking what's in your backpack, and is it all there? What's happening today? Because the sooner you prepare them to do that, then they will succeed in it, because there will be that one day where you will not have that time. Something is going to go sideways. You're going to be needed somewhere else. And then your child cannot take care of it if you never train them how to do it.
Mm.
And then there's this element of balance. And it's really interesting because I feel that Nordics in general are extremely high performing, but they value the high performance time just as much as the recharging time.
Mm.
They think it is not possible to perform highly if you also didn't recharge. For example, if we went to Helsinki right now and we wanted to buy flowers, it's July, we would not find one flower shop open until August because they would all be on summer vacation. So for example, during the day, and if we talk about the morning, people get themselves ready for the day. And like you mentioned, you might have a workout, or you're getting ready in another way, or you take a moment, which Nordics highly value, to drink your coffee sitting down from a real cup hot. And then you're so much more ready for the day and to succeed in whatever you want to do. And I think it's interesting, it also goes the same way in the evening. So Nordics don't tend to work too late or just push hard too late. Anything that sort of I would qualify as high performance usually ends before 4 p.m. The official work week is 37 and a half hours.
Mm.
And they've been pushing for a 4-day work week. I don't know if that will happen or not, but they're pushing for it. And I think the idea behind that is that the country, and I'm talking about Finland, but also all the other Nordic countries, they really value this time. You have your high performance time, you have your time with the family, and you have your time with yourself. And they're all equally important. If one piece is missing, the wheel is not moving forward. And I think that's what we often miss here, that we fill our days with so many things that we don't necessarily need to take on.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that you said you feel most um, Nordics are high performers, and I think that that's such a like. What do you mean by that? I want to hear more about how you view them.
So so this is really interesting. So if you get a Nordic product, it's always extremely high quality.
Mm.
It's done extremely well. It's going to last for a really long time. All the details are taken into account. So then if you go there, that's sort of what you tend to see everywhere. Of course, there's exceptions, but in general, that's what you can expect. And when you talk to somebody, the chances are they're extremely highly educated in whatever you're talking to them about. They're experts. And you almost always sort of get that very high level experience in a way. So in work, I think people work very hard, but they don't like to waste time.
Mm.
So they work very efficiently. And I think the same goes with, for example, I would say the same goes with parenting, for example, as well. I think the way you parent, a lot of it is also, it's obviously the together time, but it's the life skills that you teach for your children.
Mm.
So it's really interesting. I think I just always go back to everything feels very high quality. I mean, I guess a good example would be the Helsinki airport. I remember my kids hadn't been there for a long time when we went there for that fall. And the first thing my kids said when we walked through the airport, they said, "Did we arrive into the future?"
What about the airport is so high performing?
It's just exquisitely beautiful, exquisitely clean. There's trees everywhere inside the airport. So it kind of feels like you're almost in a garden. You have really amazing, high quality cafes and restaurants that are really beautiful everywhere. So if you want to have a really healthy meal, it's very easy. And you want to have a hot cup of coffee from a beautiful cup, easy. And you have lounge chairs. There's one little area with the children's playground. And you have so many beautiful services all throughout the airport. It's a really pleasant place to be. I actually love going there very early because I like to hang out there. It's that nice.
A little different than flying to JFK, I'm assuming. Yeah.
Yes.
And yeah, we have CVG here in Cincinnati, and I mean, it's basically like, you know, it looks like a really old abandoned hospital that
Yeah.
if you walk all the way through it, you'll find an airplane on the other side.
So then
So,
you'll get a kick out of this. So if you go to the bathrooms in the Helsinki airport, they have a soundtrack with birds chirping. And then all by the gates, you have free strollers and free hand luggage carts. So it's always that little extra mile. There's always that little extra that you get without having to pay for it. And like water stations to fill out your water bottle with just really tasty water all throughout the airport. Just think little things like that.
so funny. If you want to get a one of those buggies, if you will, in most of the airports I've been to lately, they're locked up and they charge money to get one out of there.
They're
You know,
expensive.
yeah, well, yeah, you got to like swipe your credit card and it like releases it out of, the jaws of life. Yeah, it's serious business over here in the US. Atlanta, man, big airport, people flown through there a few times. I will say I was at an airport recently in Montana and they had a bar that you could sit at. And if you ordered food, this like robot would drive your food up to you in your seat. Have you seen these before? And it had like a sliding door that would slide down, and then on a tray inside the robot was your food, and it would like sing a song when it was coming over to you. I'd never seen that before, but that was pretty. Airports, man,
I don't like that. I don't think I want that
robot delivery
for my
food.
future.
I got it. It happened. It was quite the experience
I just love that Annabella said she gets to the airport early because
to hang out.
it's such a nice place.
Airport's just kind of lit.
Whereas in the US, we try to get there as late as possible because we know we're just like, oh, it's just more fast food, more chains, gross sitting, bad lighting. What a
There's
difference.
just birds in the bathroom, chirping and
I would love to kind of enter into what I call like these rapid fire rounds where I pitch a topic or a concept, and I'd love to hear you compare the Nordic way versus the American way, because I feel like so far our conversation has been laying the groundwork for the difference. And here are some of the differences I hear you saying is one, it starts at the perspective. It starts at the Finnish or the Nordic perspective feels one, more intentional, efficiency driven, but not to the sake of abandoning quality, which I think is Americans' greatest downfall, truthfully. We are so efficiency driven, but we will sacrifice quality. And so then is it really efficient? And then I also think there's not this same sense of I'm going to be a martyr if I'm a mother. It's not this sense of I'm going to lay it all out there and do every little thing, and that means I'm a good mom. Actually, what it sounds like is I'm going to intentionally train my children to be amazing adults and teens and elementary school students who can navigate the world on their own in some way. And so having this shift of parenting says XYZ about me because I worked so hard versus I'm going to parent with the perspective of how I want my kids to thrive in their future versions of themselves. Such a beautiful thing. But then also, it seems that even your mention of, the Nordics want you to have a cup of coffee and a nice, beautiful cup and sit down and enjoy it. There's this savoring of the moment, this peacefulness that because we're high performing, because we're making everything really high quality, we're also going to savor it.
Mm.
And I love how you said this wheel of family time, independent alone time, and work time. And we need all three of those to hit and to continue. And I think that that's so true. And we could dive into all the reasons why the American workplace is struggles with this, or why we have such a weird emphasis on just the grind, right? Um, but aside from that, I think we all kind of feel that as Americans. I'd love to get into, now that we have this foundation of I can kind of visualize what it feels like. By the way, when you're traveling there, I want to take a trip and see this
Yeah,
airport. I think that'd be
no
so
kidding.
fun. Let's get into this rapid fire round, right? So I want to hear, what are some differences that you have seen when people become parents for the first time? Are there ways that it's talked about in America versus in Finland that are contrasting?
Here, we always hear is we are surviving.
Mm.
I'm surviving here, over here. I'm surviving, not thriving. That you do not hear in the Nordics. What I hear often is, I love this so much. I enjoy this so much. It might be hard, but oh man, I enjoy this first year so much.
Mm.
Wow. I enjoy the first year so much. They're saying that. They're saying that about their baby's first year of life. And with that, what is that just overall? Is that like I might not be sleeping, but I'm enjoying it, or are there some efficiencies that they've found? Let's talk about sleep training, right? What are some of the differences there?
I think that the first efficiency is that you are allowed culturally, and it's just a society's expectation that you focus your first year just on your child.
Mm.
That's it. And it's very much shared with both parents. So now there's the paternity leave. It's basically mandatory in a sense that if the dad also doesn't take, I think it's about 4.5 months now. If he doesn't take it, then the family loses that part of the parental leave. But overall, it's well over a year, right? So combined with both parents. So there's that. You don't you can do it all, but you don't have to do it all at the same time.
Mm.
You take time for all these different parts of your life. It doesn't need to be a hockey stick up everything. It's a road that has highs and lows and different intensity levels. And in terms of the efficiencies with sleep, it's interesting because there's so much less stress in terms of what you should do or what the goal is.
Mm.
It's do whatever works, what's easiest, how will you get the most amount of sleep. So this means that enter the very famous and potentially controversial Scandinavian outdoor nap in a stroller in all types of temperatures, which I would say is a game changer if anyone ever wanted to try it. And a lot of bed sharing. And in Nordic countries, just as you're taught about safe baby sleep in whatever surface, in the crib, for example. You're also taught about how to bed share safely. So bed sharing is probably the most common way of sleeping, because you don't have to get up from the bed.
That it's surprising to me when you said do whatever works best for them and whatever gets them the most sleep. I thought you were maybe gonna jump to like a really rigid, like cry it out method, get that baby in the crib, but it's the opposite. It's bring the
Opposite.
baby in with you and allow you to sleep. And that is something that a lot of our audience does and loves. And in American culture, that's like considered crunchy, right? It's like, oh, you bed share? Ooh, you must be one of those hippies. And that's so funny that in Finland, you're like, no, that's the most efficient way to get the best sleep. So just be close to your child, probably as we would have been for 1,000 years.
Tell me about these stroller naps. What is this?
So this is so amazing. I gotta tell you, if I recommend you take anything out of this podcast and you have a baby, do the outdoor stroller nap. It's magic. So in all Nordic countries, the most common way, though again, naps, whatever works, but the most common way is that when your child is tired, you put them to nap in a stroller. And I'm talking about a very sturdy, high quality stroller with the bassinet attachment.
Hmm.
So you put your child, you bundle them up really well, you put them in a very cozy foot muff that works for a bassinet attachment. And then you place your child, your baby there on their back, and you have them nap outside. Of course, in the Nordics, it's very common that you might even go to a coffee shop and you might leave your child outside in the stroller napping while you go get a cup of coffee. Here, I understand it might not be possible. So then there's different ways. I did it for 3 years. I did it. We have a backyard, enclosed backyard, and a covered patio. So my child slept in the stroller on the patio. Everything from temperatures, it doesn't really get that cold here, but Finland officially recommends do it if it's warmer than it's minus 15 Celsius. What is that in Fahrenheit? 5 Fahrenheit.
Hmm.
So if it's warmer than 5 Fahrenheit, then you can do it. And then I would personally not do it if it's hotter than 70, 75 in the shade, depending on how it feels. And then, of course, you would change the foot muff to a really light summer foot muff. I obviously have foot muffs for every possible weather.
I don't know if I know what a foot muff is.
So foot muff it's like a little baby bed that you put in either into a bassinet or the reclining seat.
Hmm.
So basically, it has a really cozy, sort of a thick back,
Hmm.
and then it's almost like like a sleep sack. That
Oh,
would be a better way of describing it. So it's like the way you would put your child into a crib in a sleep sack. This is made for either the bassinet or the reclining seat.
gotcha. And there's different versions of this foot muff for different temperatures. And I'm
Correct.
guessing the like, sub zero
Sub-zero.
is a pretty insulated version, is my guess. Or their face is exposed.
Hmm.
Yes.
So what's
So
the thought of putting your kid in like freezing weather? I mean like water freezing. So like let's call it Fahrenheit, 20 degrees, but like, Celsius, we're talking, -5 or whatever that calculation would look like. What are the benefits to that? And why does that help our baby?
So if we just talk about the health benefits, one is the Nordics always believe the more outdoor time you can get, the better off you are. So officially, Finland's education ministry recommends that for young kids, 2 to 3 hours a day minimum,
Wow.
you should spend outside. And elementary age kids, it's about 2 hours. And babies easily spend that much time outside because of these stroller naps. And it's really good for your immune system. because you're outside, you're not inside with the germs. So that would be the basic argument. But also, you want to be exposed to all the different types of weather, um, just to get used to it. They're never cold, they're always dressed appropriately for the weather. But it also feels really nice. Like if you have a cold day and you're all bundled up outside, like it actually feels really nice. You're breathing in the fresh air. You hear the elements, you hear the birds chirping, you're like falling asleep to those like nature sounds. Obviously, if you're in the city, it's probably the hum of whatever you hear. And the babies sleep, they fall asleep really quickly, and they sleep for a very long time.
Mm.
So it also is it gives parents such a break, because even though it's not, I can't guarantee for every circumstance, most of the time it works so well that you don't need to spend any time trying to get your newborn baby to fall asleep, because they fall asleep so fast. And then second, they're going to sleep so long. So you have time for yourself. And I recommend that, of course, everybody needs to figure out what's safe for them. But for example, for me, in close backyard patio worked. I was probably somewhere downstairs. I had the door window craft open a little bit. You could, of course, use a baby monitor as well. But I was never so far that I couldn't hear him.
Mm.
Babies are loud.
Oh yeah.
When they cry, they're loud. And you could also just keep your baby on a balcony, for example. So totally safe. No one else can get there. And actually, in my video, some people were concerned. I made a video about this, that it would be illegal, or that child services would come and take your child away. So actually, I called Connecticut Child Services to ask. And she said she had never heard of this. But she said, I really don't think this is illegal in any way. So
Mm.
that's
That's
the assurance I can give.
is there any covering? Does this stroller need a cover or can it be open?
So I always use, like, let's say if you get a bassinet, the bassinet usually always comes with the canopy.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
So
Put
then
that
you
up.
always have the canopy attachment. And even in the reclining seats, I like the canopies that extend
Mm-hmm.
and go all the way, because then you're also, if it's windy, your child is protected from the elements. You can go, push it as much down as you feel like your child needs for that particular nap, based on what the weather conditions are.
That's good.
My brain, and again, I'm making so I'm reading into this a little bit, but hear me out for a second. I'm just thinking of this idea of environmental conditioning, right? So where you're getting your kids, so let's say the noise in your area, right, is becoming normal to them, right? It's the same thought of if you have a fan blowing on your kid for years at a time, now they're like, I gotta fall asleep with a fan, right? Or, it's so funny you say that. They're hearing the sounds outside. It's like we put like sound machines in the room for kids to mimic things you could get if you just put them outside. We don't have like a city, like, sirens and things going on, but maybe like if you're in the city, I'm just swinging here. It's gonna be totally off, but maybe it would be beneficial for them to be in an isolated, safe place outside, listening to city noise that can kind of become the kind of quote unquote white noise for them as they grow up and get older. And I even think about our middle daughter that grew up, and we were renovating our house, and for a significant period of her life, every nap and every like time that she would go to sleep, there was construction noise in our home, and she kind of had to deal with that. Well, I'll never forget there was a time where we had a an air compressor in her bedroom, and we were doing some framing while she was napping. And so we weren't super worried about the noise of the nail gun. It was a framing gun, so it was, brad nailer, so it wasn't like a huge boom, like a you know anyways, framing gun would have been, we're not framing. We were doing
Trim.
baseboards, trim carpeting, not framing, sorry. And then the in her bedroom where she was napping, the air compressor, I don't even know why it was in there. I'm thinking about it. It's such a ridiculous move, but it kicked on. It's like makes this really loud noise to recharge the air on the inside of the air compressor. And my buddy that was helping me was like, looked at me, he's like, dude, is Ruthie in there napping right now? Because she's definitely not asleep. And I remember going in there and she was just snoozing. And I pulled the thing out of her room and he was like, "Are you serious?" And I was like, "I don't know. I guess she's used to used to the noise." But anyways, these are kind of the thoughts that are running through my head as I hear you talk about this. Wherein, man, if your kids are outside where they live, there's some natural, maybe like environmental conditioning benefits going on there. I don't know. Just kind of making some assumptions here.
I also love that you guys, like, there's got to be some biological science behind this, and that, and you guys, you just utilize the what's biologically appropriate for your child, and it ends up making your life easier.
Mm,
Like, how often in American parenting are we trying to go against the biology, and then it makes things so hard? We have to have this 10-step program to get our kid down for a nap, and then guess what, they only nap for 45 minutes and then they're up again, and then mom is going insane because she can't catch a breath. And it's like, thinking of it not only through the lens of, okay, what is culturally and societally normal, but those things have probably been passed down from generation to generation. And that's something we often don't see in the US, is because we might not have that long, thick line of heritage, because we're all scrambled and we all live in different places, and we might not even know what our heritage would have done,
hmm
because we're so disconnected from that. And so I think that that's interesting, that the napping outside is the perfect, like, natural environment conducive for sleep. Therefore, the mom is able to have, one, a rested baby, because I'm telling you, that baby is different when it is rested versus the kid who keeps waking up every 45 minutes. And two, she's able to make herself a cup of tea and sit, or read part of a book, or tend to her other children, you know?
hmm
So I think that's a great idea, a great perspective. So we have the sleep training element. You guys are bed sharing primarily. Then we have the napping element, where you guys are just using outside in nature. And the important thing you're saying too is that you're equipped to do so. You have the stroller with the bassinet inset, you have the appropriate bedding that's not loose, and we're not going to cover baby's face and worry about suffocation. You've got kind of these products available and tailored to that situation, which is beautiful. I'm definitely going to buy that for our next child. I'd love to continue on this kind of roadmap, right? So I also want to hear, like, how do Finnish parents address food and eating, and I want to hear all the things.
Baby food, toddler food, kids food, family food,
All of it. So
all of it.
how do they address, yeah, from the time your kid is eating solids to when they are now able to eat whatever the family is eating? Maybe that's the same thing. How do you guys address that? Because in America, we have, the kids menu with chicken fingers and mac and cheese, and then no one can eat anything. And then they're limited to these 5 foods, and we have this epidemic of picky eating, and then we've got undernourished kids. And anytime you go to a restaurant, it's just panic, right? So how do you guys address food and feeding children, and getting the right nutrients into them?
Right. So the first thing I would say is that in Europe, in general, food is cleaner.
Mm.
And sometimes even when I'm there, if I don't have the opportunity to just make something for myself, make something for my kids, let's say in the morning, I just have them make themselves instant oatmeal. I feel okay about it in Finland, but I don't think I would ever do that in the US because the ingredients are so much cleaner. So I think that in general makes life a little bit easier, that you can trust the food sources a little bit more. And if you read the ingredients, like let's say I always read all the ingredients for everything that I buy in the US just to double check. And I don't buy anything, if I don't know what it is that's in the food. In Finland, I it's pretty easy to tell what's in the food. I also think that what's really interesting, and I'll take this as an example. So a lot of children from the ages of around 1 to 3 start daycare. And I would say, before anyone panics, the concept of daycare is extremely different in Finland compared to the US. It's a lot of outdoor play, most of the day. It would be probably closer to something like a forest school in the US. You might walk around the town and learn traffic signals and a lot of free play. And also, which is interesting, meal times are really important. So it's almost like the daycare and the families can work together in creating this food culture for the children that's rich. So let's say you have a mom who happened to have a long work day, it's feeding the children healthy food might not just be on the mom's or the dad's shoulders, because they have these little dining rooms at daycare. You never pack lunch, right? In Finland, you never pack lunch. That's another thing that is nice, and why I also told my kids, if we're going to live here, you need to pack your own. But when you're there, the all the daycares, they might order these meals that are sort of handmade, from scratch, like meals made from scratch, and the schools have chefs, so they get real meals every day. Their meals, the school day is really short, so there's just one meal per day. But like if a daycare is longer, you have your one meal per day. That's a beautiful meal, and you have it in a little mini dining area for the children, and then you have your healthy snacks. And then I think the when you go to restaurants, you don't really see kids menus like that. Sometimes you might have kids portions, but oftentimes if you go to a place, it might be something potentially simpler, but the focus is not on just hamburgers and pasta and nuggets, rather throughout, whether it's in at school or daycare or at home or in a restaurant. I think people keep meals simple, but focused on real food.
Mm. So you don't, you even said they might have children's portions, but they might not have children's menu items. And I think it's funny, even in the States, even if you go to a Mexican restaurant, you'll still see chicken nuggets as it's like it's not even anywhere in the cuisine. It's not offered in any capacity. But because kids are so trained to eat these types of quote kids foods here, they they would have parents in an uproar if they didn't have something that their kid, God forbid, they had to try another cuisine, or they had to try something with a different texture or maybe a different spice profile. And that's something that we as parents, obviously very food focused parents, have always kind of fought against.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that like if we go out and our kid wants chicken, we won't order it for them, but just this idea that there has to be kids food and adult food. Um, and we've recently even kind of changed our philosophy around what we'll allow our kids to eat, and
Mm-hmm.
and we've put kind of a stricter guidelines on that. So maybe we'll talk about that another time. But I think that's interesting that in general you find the ingredients to be simpler and probably just more whole real foods prepared in a way, and less maybe like prepackaged or the school lunch system in the United States is absolutely atrocious. It's some of the way that we feed our children in school, our people, our men and women who are incarcerated, and then our military and our seniors, all of those kind of being like our public food uh,
Offerings.
offerings is so awful. It's astonishing how we are feeding the American people, and it's just a really big bummer. So it makes it
I just
simpler.
realized something when you said that. It's really interesting. When I'm there, my kids don't eat any prepackaged foods.
Mm.
Mm.
There's no need.
So what do they eat? Give us an example of what they would eat.
So let's say for breakfast, you would have breakfast at home. So it could be usually, like, for example, oatmeal, or they could have yogurt with granola, something like that. Then they have their meals at the school or daycare, because when we go there, different topic, but I pull my kids out of public school and I withdraw them for about 1 to 2 months out of the year. And then I put them in school in Finland for a language immersion and for the Finnish daycare as well. That's where the youngest goes. So then they have their meals there. For afternoon snack, it could be anything from like egg on a toast or avocado toast, something like that, because they might come home, they might make it. They can do those themselves. If I happen to have the time, I could make it for them. And then let's say for dinner, if I'm ambitious, I'll make a simple soup. And I think what's really nice is in the grocery stores there, it's just so easy to go because you're in a city center, so you can just walk into all these little grocery stores nearby you. But we'll go in and we'll figure out what we want to make. So let's say we'll just get broccoli and we might get some noodles, and then might buy a sauce. Obviously, the sauce might be ready made, but we'll make sure it's something with clean ingredients, which so far they always have been. And then we might do something simple, like we could do a simple ramen or like pasta, or we could do rice dish with different veggies. And that might be what they eat in a day.
Hmm.
So they're not opening up a bag of chips or a box of crackers or soda or anything.
My kids are actually not allowed to drink the soda. I'm like, if you see a Gatorade, you have to run to the other direction. Because they do a lot of sports. They love sports, and all their friends drink Gatorade. So, but by that now they know. I'm like, look, it has red 40.
Yeah.
So they read the ingredients and they know. And as we know in California, it's banned. But in Finland, a lot of these ingredients are not available. They are not exposed to them anyhow. So I think here you just have to be more careful and teach your children. So yes, you can have water. We can, make you your own Gatorade if you really want to, but you're not going to drink that one from the bottle. So yeah, no, I think we spent the last month we were there in April. I don't think we once opened a bag of chips, or we would have real bread from a bakery. And I literally don't think they ate anything out of plastic, because they love those little raisin packets, but they are in like these little cardboard. They're not even in plastic. They're in these little cardboard to go cases.
Mm-hmm. Wow. It's amazing too when you fill up on real food, how you actually don't need to crunch on the bag of chips. It's wild how that works out. I love this. So we hit on some sleep elements, we've hit on food. I'm curious now, shifting a little bit away from the child and more focusing on how do you see moms filling their days in Finland because they have more time? How are they making good use of that time? And what are they doing? Like, give us an example of like a day in the life of a Finnish mother, because I'm so curious how that would contrast to the picture we all have in our head of the day in the life of an American mother.
Yes. So I think maybe a great way to start would be is talking about kids that are 1 to 3 years old. So you can stay home with your child. Let's say you have a full-time job. You can stay, or even if you were a freelancer, you could stay home till your child is 3, and you would be paid for that time. Less and less the longer you are, but you are always compensated for your caretaking, and the caretaking is sort of valued very highly. And usually at that time, at least in my friend circle, and this is most of Finnish women, usually they go back to work. And what I hear a lot is that oftentimes work is very much something they really wanted to do. It's oftentimes something that they're very proud of. They're well educated for it. I think it's oftentimes something they really enjoy. And your workday ends by the time you pick up your kids from daycare. So let's say by 4, everybody's usually picking up their kids from daycare. If you want to get hold of anyone, or you want to get anything done after 4, you are out of luck, because everybody has left work. And that's when family time begins.
Hmm.
And then you might have, for example, kids' activities, but they are not the main part of your evening. You don't spend every single evening driving your children all over the place as your main activity. Kids definitely have sports and they definitely have activities, but it is, I don't see it being the number one thing that fills up your time. So you work out, you take care of yourself, you see your friends, you might go for an evening walk with your partner, and then you have unscheduled time as well, where the time doesn't necessarily need to be filled with something. And I think what's interesting is this kind of comes back to the balance that I was talking about, is that there's the high, efficiency time and the me time and the family time. And in a typical Finnish day, you have time for all those things. Whereas I feel like in the US, in comparison, let's take me, for example. I would have been in the office till 7, maybe sometimes 8. Sometimes people order dinner to the office. And I would have been back after the kids would have been asleep. So there clearly would have not been that one piece of the puzzle. Or if you're expected to be available after your work time ends, you're not completely off the clock and relaxing and focusing on those other parts, family parts, and the part that's for you to recharge.
Are there
So
stay-at-home moms in Finland? Is that a category? Is that something you guys talk about? Is I'm a stay-at-home mom?
it's not a category the way you have it here. So here I think it's really distinct, where you choose early on, I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom or I'm going to be a working mom. And I think that almost like categorizes you in a way. And I feel like there should be another category, because there's so many women that I know that they hopped out of the more corporate career track because it didn't offer the flexibility, but they have passions or they have a calling or they have something really important they want to give to the world. And they're not necessarily only focused on children 24/7, because they have this other calling and these other, offering, I would call it offerings to the world. And there's a lot of women, I think, in the US that have created this third category that we don't talk about. And I think it's really interesting. And I think it's actually really beautiful. And I personally have been very inspired by it. I wrote about it in Business Insider. It was out a couple of days ago, about this third category, where there's so many women that are extremely smart and extremely skilled, but there's no space for them in the traditional working world, because we expect women to move through it as if the children and the family didn't exist. And by the way, same for men. So it's really interesting, where then I think, because they have had to, you find another way to be able to do what you're passionate about and put those skill sets and the expertise to use for others' benefit. I think in Finland, it's much easier to, I would say there you actually can have it all, because it's all in balance. And there certainly are what I would categorize stay-at-home moms, but I think that group is smaller. But then it's important to take into account, let's say you have 3 children, and let's say they're 3 years apart. Now you might be home for 9 years, but you might not even call yourself stay-at-home mom, because you're actually just on your care leave,
Oh,
Mm.
right?
yes.
So, and here it's like you stay home longer than, let's say, 6 weeks. And
Mm.
now you're a stay-at-home mom. So it's very different the way you look at it.
It sounds like something you guys are able to do, and this wouldn't work in our current economy structure, is you guys allow the woman to like pause and you say focus for that first year or up to 3 years on your child. And in the US, that doesn't happen. You're lucky if you get 6 weeks paid. I remember I didn't have anything paid offered to me, and that's normal. And so that is why I think it's more economical Like, it wouldn't make sense for me to go get a full-time job. It would be too expensive for me to figure out where my kids would go. Also, I don't currently have a desire to do that. But I think to your point, yeah, they might have been home for the first 9 years of their oldest kid's life and the first 3 years of their youngest, but they wouldn't be like, I'm a stay-at-home mom. They don't have to put their flag down and label themselves as such. It's built into your society. It's a little more integrated. Um, is homeschooling a thing in Finland, or does everyone send their kid to a public or private school? I know you said the daycare is more like a forest school, so it's really just probably interaction time for the little kids. But do people homeschool there?
So what I've heard is I should probably tell you a little bit about the differences between the school systems because they're so huge.
Mm.
That said, I think for homeschooling, it's usually potentially for children where the children have high needs
Mm.
and the school system is not able to or doesn't have enough resources to help those children. Then a parent might make the choice, let me homeschool. That said, I should probably tell you that the school system is so different. It is for, let's say, for a third grader, the school day is only about 4 or 5 hours long, not 7, and it's very focused on developing life skills and learning through play.
Mm.
And if you wanted to, I could give you an example of, let's say, a typical Friday in a Finnish third grader's life. So last time we were there, the I asked the boys, so like, how was your day on Friday? Like, what was the first thing that you did? And they said, oh, we had PE. I was like, what did you do? Oh, we went and we were playing hide and seek by the seaside. And I said, oh, that sounds fun. Like, how long did you do that? They're like, for 2 hours.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, oh, well, what did you have after PE? Oh, then we had recess.
Oh my gosh.
And then I said, well, what about after recess? Well, then we had lunch. And then I was like, well, did you actually, this is the American in me. Did you learn anything? And I was like, I hold you on the other side of the world. And there you are just doing hide and seek and having recess, having lunch with your friends cooked by your chef. Um, so then she said, okay, we had one more class. It was French. So they were studying in Finland, you study multiple languages from a pretty young age. So they told me the couple of French words that they learned. But it was really interesting, and that was their school day. So it's it's fascinating where the there's no standardized testing. I only ever took one standardized test in my entire education during my entire education in Finland, which is when I was 18. And a lot of the schooling is very much focused on developing these skills that really turn you into a problem solver more so than getting the right answer. And I think that's why Finland continues to be, even though it's no longer at the very top, it's still at the top of the PISA results, which if you don't know about PISA, there are these international ratings for education around the world.
Wow. So again, it's like it's a similar contrast to the workforce. It's like in America, if you say you're a stay-at-home mom who homeschools, you then know 5 assumptions about that person immediately. You kind of know who they probably are because it's such a character almost in American society. I'm that person, right? And then but we do that out of it's almost like our reaction to our frustration with this public school system. And, private school is just wildly expensive. It's the same thing with our frustration with the maybe workplace in America. It's just not possible for us to probably do both those things. So then we choose. And obviously there's going to be differences in every culture. So it's not to say that one is better than the other, but I think it's interesting that you probably don't see moms argue as much about what's right and what's not right because they're able to experience life um, more integrated because of the result of how your society is set up versus in the US, you kind of have to stake your claim. You kind of have to figure out like, uh, am I sending my kid to public school or am I not? Sometimes they'll let you do half day school, but that gets really tricky. So it by nature, I guess is what I'm trying to say, becomes
Mhm.
more divisive. Now it's up to us as the humans of the cat of the equation not to let that be divisive and to be able to say, I understand everyone makes their own decisions. But I'm glad I asked the question because you're almost saying the schooling wouldn't warrant such a heavy homeschool population because the schooling itself is already accomplishing what American homeschoolers want to see. And that's kids with more autonomous play, more time outside, learning interesting things that aren't taught within the system, like other languages or life skills. Those things are being taught within the school system in Finland. And that's the brilliant difference. And so, wow, what a wild comparison. um, I'd love to, since we have kind of dogged on the American side a lot, I'm curious if you've noticed what is something that America does well that maybe Nordic countries have a different take on. Like, what can the flip side ever be applied where we have things in our society that are actually really good and really awesome?
I think the first thing that pops into my head is the independence question. And there is a flip side to it, especially when the kids get a little bit older. So let's say you have late tweens or teenagers. At this time, you have so much autonomy in Finland. Think about it. You can move about 100% like on your own. You handle your life basically on your own. And I think this is where it can potentially get a lot harder to keep your child. Let's say if they have a friend group that might have influences that you might not support, on the sort of straight and narrow, if I was to use that term. And I think it's really interesting where in the US, because they cannot move independently until they are 16 because they can't drive, you have more of an ability to influence your child and also maybe keep that child close.
Mm.
And I think that's a really interesting difference that I see because I have been thinking about this when my boys get older. What will I do? Will I dare to throw them into the sea of teenagers in Helsinki to do God knows what? Or will I trust them enough to make really smart choices? Or will I put the brakes on at that point and keep them a lot closer and shorten the leash in a way? So it's interesting. I think that's kind of the point where hopefully by providing all the independence and teaching our children to make smart choices at that point, even if they're very rebellious, we can trust them. But at the same time, I do know from many Finnish parents that that's the time where they feel that things are quite out of their control.
Mm.
And it's much harder at
It,
that point.
yeah, it's almost like how can we balance the autonomy and training of young kids while still building in maybe family culture and closeness with our kids to keep them around even when they are autonomous, when they hit that. And I think about that too. You know, our oldest is 13 and she has a lot of autonomy, I'd say, compared to most American
Definitely,
kids.
definitely.
Um, and so, but we want to like the way we kind of think through that is like, how can we weave in like shared interests? How can we have things that we do together, that will supersede her, teenage years, and that even when she's in her 20s or 30s, like we can still go do things together. And so having kind of that common interest, building that friendship is something I think about because, yeah, I want my kids to be independent, but I also want them to come and hang around me when when I am old and they're adults because I know my relationship with my parents as an adult is really important. And I want that too. So that's interesting as kind of a default of Americans delaying maybe some of that maturity. Then we get to be that close, influential person in their life for longer. But I think both Finnish parents and American parents can glean from each other. We can pull the best of both societies and kind of work that into our own home. So I think that that's great. Do you have any other questions?
I'm all set. No, this is awesome.
Yeah, I'm loving this conversation. Anything else that you felt like you wanted to point out or discuss?
I have one more story I could share.
Yes.
And this goes back to the independence. I think this would be a really nice way to close this based on what we just talked about. A little while back, I asked my oldest son, what was your favorite experience of your time in Finland? And he said, when I was biking to school by myself. And I said, oh, tell me more. He said, well, first I thought I was going to die. And I said, oh my God, should I call a therapist now? What have I done? I clearly pushed him too hard. I didn't say anything, but I just said, hey, okay, that's interesting. Tell me more. And he said, there was this one time where I got lost. So I was tracking them, but I was not tracking them every second. So this must not have taken for a very long time. And he said, I got lost and I didn't know where I was. And I said, oh, tell me more. And he said, and I thought I'm just going to die here because I can't find my way back. And then I thought about it and I decided that I'm just going to go back the way I came from. And then I eventually will figure out where I am. I'll find the point where I know where I am. So I went backwards. I found a spot where everything was familiar and I came home. And now I know I can do it. And I think it was I think this sort of sums up both all of our parents' fears and also all the greatness that can come from allowing our children a little bit of independence, because there was this incredible sense of confidence and incredible sense of this was the best thing that happened to me, because he somehow felt so competent and capable, because he could, without call, he could have just called me and asked me to come and find him, which I probably would have done in minutes. But he instead made the choice, let me figure this out. And then knowing that he could figure this out, he felt like such a citizen of the world. And I think that was a really beautiful way to give him an opportunity to do something that we often don't allow our kids.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. The most impactful thing he experienced was the responsibility that he was given. And I think that's a major takeaway that maybe even a title of this episode here of the value, the joy and the fun and the maturity that comes with responsibility for kids. And I love that. Annabella, this has been so fun. And thank you so much for being here. And before we go, though, I would love you to let people know where they can find you. So if they want to hear more from Annabella and all the things that you're doing and teaching now, where can people find you?
So for brief videos and good conversations, sometimes heated, you want to hop over to Instagram, and I'm there under at Annabella Daily. And you can also find me on TikTok at Scandi Mom Secrets. And I also have a newsletter. So if you want to dive into any of these topics much deeper, I give much more specific tips on how to apply one Nordic inspired idea to your life in the US or elsewhere outside of the Nordics. I send a newsletter out every 2 weeks, and that's at scandiclass.substack.com.
Love it. This has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.